Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nimhauser. You can find me on Instagram and on Twitter at Hawk Blogger. And as we enter Wednesday, July 10th, we are exactly 1 week away from rookies reporting to Seahawks training camp. We are getting close, folks. And I don't know if this definitely happened while I was away and traveling, but I missed it. So maybe you all saw it, but access to training camp has been announced. This happened while I was gone. If you have not seen it over on Seahawks.com, you can get your tickets to training camp. It's up there. So if you go to Seahawks.com, you can register. As far as I can tell, registration's open for all days, starting on July 24th. So we are 2 weeks away from training camp access, and I will certainly be there for as many of those days as possible, giving you instant reactions, breaking down all the positions, what I'm seeing, as I've done in some of the past years. So I know a lot of you have really found me through my training camp coverage over the years. So really looking forward to getting back to that after really a couple of years where it wasn't interesting enough to me, to be honest. It wasn't worth the time to break down. And I had other things going on, whether it was work or other pieces. But this year, part of the benefit of me really committing myself to spending time on covering the Seahawks is I will be there as many times as I can and give you as much coverage as I can, because I am fascinated by it. And I know all of you are. So I think it's Seahawks.com/training camp to register. And I've met some folks there. I'd be happy to meet some of you there as well. Once practice gets going, I'm pretty locked in, I got to say. So I'm probably not the most talkative person once practice gets going. I am looking, even beforehand, I'm checking who's off on the side with injury issues. During practice, I'm looking at trying to build the depth chart based off where people are getting reps. So I wish I had 55 eyes when I'm at training camp, because there's only so much you can watch at any one time. I will probably try to build my training camp guide that I've done in the past with notes on all 90 players, make that available for people to download and bring with them, print out if they want, so they can not only watch the practice, but have a little bit of information on each of the players. And that's great, not only for some of the folks that are hardcore fans, but it's great for people that are not. And maybe you're just trying to get to know some of the guys on the team. And so a lot of people have enjoyed printing those out. So I'll try to do that again this year as well. What I want to talk about today, though, is we talked a little bit yesterday in episode 107 about this Seahawks schedule and some of the high variance teams on that schedule that could be easier games or they could be very hard games. Kind of sticking with that theme, I wanted to start looking at this from different vantage points. So if you think about one of the biggest questions for the Seahawks going into next year is how Mike Macdonald can impact this defense. And in a vacuum, you're like, okay, he's going to be able to help the defensive line. He's going to be able to help with pressure patterns, and he's going to help the secondary, and he's going to help, Devin Witherspoon, and all these different things we can point to, and we've talked about a lot, and we will continue to talk about a lot. But there's also these variables of if you're playing teams where you can beat up on them, then you can put up some pretty good numbers. If you're playing the best teams in the NFL, it's harder to do that. And so I wanted to look at this schedule from a point of view of who are going to be the toughest offenses that the Seahawks are going to face. How many tough offenses are the Seahawks going to face out of their 17-game schedule? And we're going to look at it from different vantage points. And I've only started this, so I have some that I've done ahead of time, some of it that I will do with you all in real time. And if you have other ideas or questions that you have about how to look at this, let me know. I might be able to do it on the fly. I do want to welcome The Pit. One of our YouTube members says, "Good morning, y'all. It's great to see you in chat. Great to have you here. You can join as a YouTube member. It's very easy, and it's a great way to become part of the crew. I think we're growing a really tight-knit group here and would love to have you be part of it. You can also join at patreon.com/hawkblogger. That gets you all the audio versions of this podcast ad-free and also gets you access to the Slack channel where you get to ask questions for the Real Hawk Talk crew. And by the way, Real Hawk Talk is back tonight, 6 o'clock. I will create the event and put it on there for us in a little bit. But yes, I'll be back tonight with some of the fellas. Looking forward to that. So people that are patrons actually get to ask questions. We've already got some, and we will be ready to answer those tonight. We'll be going over a couple other things with the fellas, but looking forward to that. Real Hawk Talk, 6 p.m. Pacific time tonight. All right. Give the show a like and subscribe if you haven't. Really appreciate it. It's a great way for you to be able to show appreciation for what's going on and to help other people find what we're building here together. So like and subscribe. Thank you so much for doing it. It matters to me, makes me happy. And I think it makes this show even better. Okay, let's get into it. I can't wait any longer. Looking at the schedule, there's kind of the simple way of looking at this where it's like, okay, who were the great offenses last year? And there's a lot of different ways to assess that. But if you go by just simple DVOA ranking, there were a few offenses that stood out. Of the teams on the Seahawks schedule, there were five teams that ranked in the top 10 in offensive DVOA last year. How many of those 5 teams do you think you can guess? I will tell you that Corey Coleman has already guessed one of them. He says that he thinks Seattle will match up well with Miami. Well, guess what? Miami was the number 2 ranked offense in the NFL last year. The number 1 ranked offense is a pretty easy one. That is the San Francisco 49ers. The number 5 ranked offense, by the way, sorry, there's more than 5. There's more than 5. We missed one here. My color coding betrayed me. 1 second. Let's try that one more time. Yes. So for some reason, it had not highlighted Buffalo. So actually, there are six teams that ranked in the top 10. And in fact, they all ranked in the top 7. So I just gave it away. The Bills were ranked 3rd in offense. We've got a guess from Matthew Phillips of the Rams. That is another one. They were ranked 7th. So 2 more to go. The Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers were ranked 5th and 6th in total DVOA offensively last year. And this is a DVOA ranking. For people that are not familiar with DVOA, this is Aaron Schatz's formula that also includes weighting of the opponents that they were facing. So I like this better than just pure statistic of like, hey, who had the most yards per game or the most points per game. I think this gets into competition and is a better weighted way to look at rankings in general. So again, San Francisco, Miami, Buffalo, Detroit, Green Bay, LA, Rams were 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 in offensive rankings last year. And if you didn't pick up on it, 2 of those teams are divisional teams. So times 2 in the terms of the games that the Seahawks will play against them. So if you do the quick math, that means the Seahawks will have 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of their 17 games next year will be against teams that were in the top 7 in offensive DVOA last year. That's rough. I think it's also worth kind of looking at the other side of this. That means that there are a number of teams that will not. In fact, there'll be more teams. There'll be 9 teams. There are 9 games, I should say. Denver ranked 19th. Arizona ranked 21st. Chicago ranked 22nd. Minnesota ranked 23rd. Atlanta ranked 24th. New England 29th. The Giants 30th. And the Jets 32nd. But as you can tell, there's a flaw to just looking at 2023 numbers. We will get into that as well. We'll try to look at some other ways to assess this as we go through it. But it's also, I think, helpful to not just look at, overall DVOA rankings. Do you think that the Seahawks run defense or pass defense is going to be stronger going into 2024? Do you think that their talent in defending the pass versus their talents in defending the run is better heading into 2024? My initial instinct is that they're going to be a better pass defense than run defense. But I don't know. I mean, Byron Murphy is a fantastic run defender. Leonard Williams is a very good run defender. You've added Jonathan Hankins, which allows Jaron Reed to move back to a defensive end position. You're going to have Draymond Jones playing more of an outside linebacker to set the edge better than some of the players that they've had. Uchenna Nwosu will be back. You could really make the case the run defense is pretty good as well, or has the talent to be pretty good. But let's take a look from a 2023 DVOA rankings, which are the top pass units that they will face in 2024. Some of the same names, not a big surprise given how much passing is part of it. So there are 6 teams that were ranked in the top 10 DVOA passing wise. The 49ers, the Dolphins, Buffalo, these are 1, 2, 3, and 4. The Packers were 4th. Detroit 7th. And the Rams 9th. By the way, the Seahawks were the 6th ranked DVOA passing team last year, in case you didn't know. But that is, again, that represents 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games against top passing teams in the NFL, and pretty much the same group of the teams that were just top overall. When you look at run rankings from a DVOA perspective last year, this one's a little interesting. This is where things get a little different. You have a lot of the same teams, but the Seahawks face, on the passing side, there's kind of this great divide. Either the Seahawks are going to be facing like a top 10, top 7 offense passing wise, or they're going to be facing one of the worst offenses, like bottom 12, 13, 14 offenses passing perspective. On the run, they face, what is this? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 of the top 15 run offenses from last year, and 7 of the top 10 run offenses from a year ago, according to DVOA. They do face some of the worst as well, but it's a sparser list. And in fact, each one of the Seahawks division opponents, rank in the top 10 rushing offenses. Did you know that? Arizona's up there. Arizona's the 9th. They were 9th in rushing last year. James Conner, Kyler Murray only played part of a season. And in spite of having an offensive line that is not particularly talented, they are a decent run blocking group. So I gave you 3 of the teams, San Francisco, LA, Arizona, that are in the top 10. San Francisco's ranked number 2. Miami was ranked number 3. I think a lot of people they think about Miami, they think about Mike McDaniel, and they think about high-powered passing offense, Tyreek Hill, down the field, Jalen Waddle, all that kind of stuff. But this was the number 3 ranked rushing offense from a DVOA perspective. Detroit was number 4. The Bills were number 6. And we'll talk about this in a second. Offensive line rankings is another way to look at the types of teams the Seahawks will be facing next year. The Rams were 7. The Cardinals were 9th, as we mentioned. And the Bears were 10th last year. Now, that one's interesting because obviously you kind of had a running back playing quarterback in some ways. I will do a quick check, but my best bet is that Justin Fields was, one of their leading rushers, if not their leading rusher last year. He was their leading rusher last year, 657 yards rushing from the quarterback position. As much as Caleb Williams certainly is a mobile quarterback and will be able to get rushing yards, he is not nearly as likely to be a runner as Justin Fields. So I'm not sure that I would assume that the Bears are going to be the same level of rushing team that they were last year, at least from a yardage perspective. The Broncos were 13th. That might also be a surprise to you. If we look at the Broncos in 2023, their rushing came from primarily Javonte Williams, but Jaleel McLaughlin was their second leading rusher, had 410 yards rushing. Russell Wilson had 341, so he still was a meaningful part of that running back crew. But those are two 23-year-old running backs in Denver, young players who started to emerge. Jaleel McLaughlin averaged over 5 yards a carry. And that Denver offensive line has some decent players on it. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But keep that in mind as we're talking about these different types of tests that the Seahawks defense is going to face in 2024. As far as the rest of the crew goes, I mean, the Jets were the 31st, the Giants were the 29th, the Vikings were the 27th, the Falcons were the 22nd. That's kind of interesting that the Falcons were so low with a good offensive line and with Bijan Robinson. The Patriots were 21st. So a little bit more of a gradation when looking at the run rankings. But, I'm tempted to look a little bit more at DVOA just to kind of set the baseline. Let me see if I can get any other aspects here that might be of value. I think that honestly, that's probably the major DVOA stuff that I would bring up for now. The other aspects that I had started to build out as I was getting on the show is looking at skill positions, because here's the thing. As we get into 2024, it's not going to be the same. Like, what did we just talk about some of the worst ranked offenses in 2023 were the New York Jets. If Aaron Rodgers is healthy and plays reasonably well, they're not going to be ranked anywhere close to 32nd in offense. The Atlanta Falcons were ranked 24th. If Kirk Cousins is healthy and, plays anywhere reasonably close to where he's played before, they will not rank anywhere close to 24th. Chicago ranked 22nd. We'll talk about in a second. It seems unlikely the Bears will rank in the 20s offensively this year. And I think Denver, there's a real question about what Denver's going to be. This was the 19th ranked offense last year. Talked about that they were the 13th ranked run offense. And now Sean Payton thinks he's got his quarterback. We'll see. But if he's able to mind meld with Bo Nix, if that's the player that he goes with, or any of the other kind of no-name guys that he's got on that roster, that's a team that could jump a little bit in the rankings. I don't know that you can really make a case other than maybe Buffalo of any of the top offenses from 2023 that the Seahawks will face that's going to take a big step back. I don't think there's a reason to think San Francisco will take a big step back. I don't think there's a reason to think Miami will. Detroit, Green Bay, the Rams, you can make the case that in most of those situations, they might actually be getting better offensively going into 2024. So I don't know that there's a lot of these guys, these teams on the Seahawks schedule where I'm like, okay, this offense got significantly worse. Minnesota might be in that category. I mean, I should have added Arizona at 21. I think that they could rank that low again, but there's also reason to think that they're going to make a jump. But, I don't know. I don't know that there's a lot of the teams, that there's any team really on this Seahawks schedule that looks like they're going to be significantly worse offensively than they were a year ago. One of the other pieces that so kind of looking at the fact that these rosters have changed, there's been draft, there's been free agency. I thought we'd tap back into some of the preseason rankings the different groups have for different parts of offenses. What's a good one to start with? Let's talk about, if you haven't read it yet, Bill Barnwell of ESPN did a ranking of the top skill position groups in the NFL. And we've been looking at these rankings primarily about the Seahawks. But I think in this regard, we're going to look at this relative to who the Seahawks are playing and who the Seahawks defense will be facing. Now, the way Barnwell did his rankings, this, by the way, this just came out today. So this is a new rankings that came out today. And he explains that this is just about running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. And if every offensive skill position player got a chance to play with the same quarterback in the same scheme, with the same weather, with the same luck, the same pace, who would have the league's best offense? So he's doing this from a statistical analysis. And he says this is only about on-field performance during the 2024 season. He is not talking about what's going to happen in years down the line. So this is not this is the best position group, like skill position group in perpetuity or for the next 3 years. It's like, this is projecting what he thinks will be the most productive skill position groups in the NFL this coming season. And he used the recent level of play and a few different advanced metrics to get a sense of how they perform. Aging curves matter, so he took age into account. And he's relied on historical performance for draftees based off the respective ranges where they were taken. So he said in that regard, he looked at Ladd McConkey, and he's looking at the typical performance of a receiver chosen early in round 2, as opposed to specifically looking at Ladd McConkey's numbers and judging what he'll do as a Charger in his rookie season. It sounds like He does factor in some injury situations. It also factors in that he weights wide receivers more heavily than running backs or tight ends. And he justifies this based off of the market and the value that teams are paying for these players, which indicate their value relative to each other. And while depth matters, he's looking at top talent. And so you are going to get heavier weighting for players that are excellent at the top, like a Justin Jefferson at the top is going to be more exciting and get higher ranking than, having some good fifth receiver or fourth receiver. All right. Last thing is he really factored in efficiency. So, how many plays did a team run, which then factors into some of the counting stats. He's looking for how much players are producing per snap. Okay. So that's a lot of preamble just to give you, he gave a lot of preamble. So I felt like it was worth at least sharing. So with that in mind, let's go through the rankings of the skill position players that the Seahawks defense will face from easiest to toughest. The 31st ranked team is the New England Patriots. This is a team that, is talking about guys like Demario Douglas and Kendrick Bourne. Hunter Henry, tight end. Jalen Polk will be a big part of it, but this is not one of the top offensive groups of skill position players the Seahawks will face. Number 30 is the Denver Broncos. So that not a great group either. And this is obviously implies that, some of this applies from a receiving perspective. There's not as many weapons. And I think that that's the case here. Cortland Sutton and Josh Reynolds are an interesting pair, but they're certainly not going to strike fear into anyone's heart. The Giants, New York Giants, are ranked 29th. So now you've got three of the worst position groups, skill position groups in the NFL, according to Barnwell, on the Seahawks schedule. And interestingly, two of those teams are the two first teams that the Seahawks defense will face: the Broncos and the Patriots. And the Giants are the fifth team the Seahawks will face. So 3 of the first 5 games will be against teams with bottom 3 skill position groups in the NFL, according to Bill Barnwell's statistics, his analytics. The next lowest ranked skill position group the Seahawks defense will face, according to Bill Barnwell, is the Buffalo Bills. So this is, I think, a bit of a surprise to some folks, maybe not to folks like us that are paying really close attention, but he's got them at 24th in the NFL, and that they've dropped significantly. So he talks about James Cook ranking 6th in the NFL in yards per scrimmage over the second half of the season. There's potential for a lot of upside with Cook if he's on the field more often. Dalton Kincaid was the rookie tight end. Wasn't as explosive as they hoped, but he's a good set of hands. Wide receivers, Stephon Diggs, I talked about how he fell off last year. He dropped from 4th to 67th in ESPN's advanced receiver metrics. He's gone. Gabe Davis was a heavy route, like a low efficiency player, and he left as well. We talked about that yesterday. But you're looking at Khalil Shakir, you're looking at Keon Coleman, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Curtis Samuel, Chase Claypool, Mac Hollins. So it has a really ugly skill position group for Buffalo. And the Seahawks play them in week 8. So again, that's another pretty low ranked skill position group. You have to like the Seahawks secondary's matchup against these groups. Okay, let's keep going. The Cardinals, despite drafting Marvin Harrison Jr., ranked 21st. And that's with Trey McBride. That's with Marvin Harrison Jr. That's with James Conner. So I think there's some upside certainly in that group, but he's got them at 21. Now we're starting to creep up a little bit higher in the rankings. All right. This one's a fascinating one to me. He's got the Green Bay Packers as 17 on this list. They were 28th last year, so they are climbing. By the way, scrolling back to the Bills went from ranked 10th in 2022 to 20th in 2023 and now to 24th going into 2024. So it's just a precipitous drop for that group. The Cardinals went from 30th last year to 21st. So it's a pretty big jump for the Cardinals given their changes this offseason. But anyway, getting back to the task at hand, the Green Bay Packers climbed from 28th to 17th. And I see the Packers as having one of the best skill position groups in the NFL. So I'm fascinated to read a little bit more about why Barnwell's got them so low on this list. And I think that the biggest reason, and it's showing up here in the first paragraph of what he's writing, is he talked about his rankings really value top shelf star power, like elite players, as opposed to depth. And what is the Packers' greatest strength is that their receiver room, almost all the receivers you could just kind of put in a bag, pull one out, and they're all good. But none of them are clearly great. I think there's some that have the potential maybe, but they don't seem, it seems like a lot of number 2 receivers, like quality number 2 receivers. Christian Watson maybe could be a number 1. Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed. They've got a lot of guys. They've got probably 5 receivers that are quite good. But in Barnwell's rankings, because they don't have the clear number 1 dominant receiver, they're lower. Luke Musgrave, I think, is still an interesting tight end and had a decent year. And then you've got Josh Jacobs. And metrics don't love Josh Jacobs. He has not been the most efficient runner. I think Josh Jacobs is still quite good. I think I would take Josh Jacobs over Derrick Henry at this point, just given where they are and the types of players they are. I think Josh Jacobs is going to be a very good player for the Packers, but we'll see. So the Packers come in at 17th. I think that's a fascinating one. I would have thought they would have been top 10, but they're 17th. Let's keep going. Next highest ranked team offensively from a skill position standpoint the Seahawks will face in 2024 is the New York Jets. He has got the Jets ranked 12th, up from 22 a year ago. And he says this is one of the offenses that has at least 2 stars. And this is, again, remember, he's heavily weighting the stars. So he's got Garrett Wilson. The receiver is one of those stars. He's got Breece Hall as the other. And I don't think there's much of an argument that those are 2 terrific offensive players. But then you've got Mike Williams. You kind of have to wait and see. He should be a big step forward from Alan Lazard, who they were playing at number 2 receiver last year. Lazard now moves to number 3. But Malachi Corley, personally, I was a big fan of. We'll see what he looks like in this offense as a rookie. And then Tyler Conklin was a guy that caught 61 passes last year. I don't know that I understand how this group of skill position players would scare a team more than the Packers. I think that there's a little bit of a flaw in Barnwell's rankings because think about this. When I go and I do my game previews heading into each week, and I'm looking at not just numbers but matchups. Invariably, where you find the mismatch is getting to some sort of depth, whether it's on the offensive line, whether it's a certain receiver against your slot corner or against, a safety or anything like that. And so the Packers present this unique challenge in that you can mix up match your formations, you can use motion, you can do all this stuff. And a lot of those things generally are used to, one, give you some information about what the defense is trying to do, but two, maybe set up your primary receiver to be in the best position to be open. The Packers have this ability that they can really look at any of those receivers to be a primary receiver. And so the matchups, like they really are going to test your depth in the secondary. I don't think the Jets are going to test your depth in the secondary. At the same time, I understand what Barnwell's getting at. If you think about Devontae Adams, when he was with Aaron Rodgers, they didn't have as much of a clear number 2 a lot of the times. It didn't matter that much because Rodgers and Adams would just destroy teams, including the Seahawks. So I guess we'll see, but I am less concerned about how the Seahawks defense would match up against the Jets skill position players than I am about the Packers. I'm curious what you all think. If you see it the same, you see it differently. But let's keep going. That was number 12. The Atlanta Falcons check in the top 10. What a climb they've had. They were 27th in 2022. They're up to 10th now. And, they've got Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. And they did all that with a really, those guys stood out in a lot of ways with a really poor quarterback play. And I do think that is potentially a very powerful trio. Kyle Pitts, I know, has been disappointing, and he had knee surgery, so you got to kind of see what that's going to look like. But with Kirk Cousins back there, I expect Kyle Pitts to be a very different player than he's been. So the Falcons rank 10th. The Rams rank 9th. And by the way, that's up from 23 going into last year. So Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua both were stars last year. And about Cooper Kupp. And it's worth calling out. Williams is an injury concern. He broke his foot as a rookie. He was held back from OTAs with another foot issue. And Kyren Williams also missed time in both of his seasons with ankle injuries. But you can't necessarily count on that. And then there's a bit of a drop off. I mean, Tutu Atwell, I think, is someone. Blake Corum is a guy. Colby Parkinson, we know. So he's got the Rams at 9. By the way, if you're curious, he has the Seahawks at 8. And I'll give you what he said there just because I'm sure you're curious. They were number 4 last year, by the way. So they've dropped in his rankings. He says the Seahawks are returning the vast majority of what got them in the top 5 a year ago, but projections across the board are a little dimmer. At running back, Kenneth Walker improved his success rate, but he wasn't quite as explosive in his second season and fell from 103 yards over expectation to minus 27 in 23. Zach Charbonnet was a solid in his debut and might project for more of an even timeshare this season. DK Metcalf, this was an interesting paragraph on DK Metcalf. Continues to stay on the field and pump out solid seasons, but he hasn't come close to matching the 1,300-yard, 10-touchdown campaign he put together in 2020. He had a 58% success rate on his targets that season, has been closer to 50% in each of the 3 ensuing campaigns. There's nothing wrong with what he's been doing. He has averaged 2.2 yards route per run, but each good season recalibrates our expectations of how likely he is to be great in the upcoming one. That's the truth. We won't turn this into a DK Metcalf conversation, but I think it's a really well crafted perspective on DK Metcalf. He does talk about Tyler Lockett taking a step backward. His 1.7 yards per route run were the worst mark he posted since 2017. It was also his worst catch rate since that season. ESPN's advanced analytics have mixed feelings. Still ranks Lockett as 19th in getting open, but the 31-year-old wideout tied for 124th in YAC score. I don't know that Lockett's ever been a YAC guy, but he did, where his YAC numbers dropped, is his deep plays. Tyler would catch a ball and go sometimes all the way to the end zone. That's not exactly what he was doing last year. Talks about Jackson Smith and Jigba. It's basically says he has had a disappointing start to his year. Failed to top 70 yards receiving in a game even once. Dropped 6 passes and ranked 14th among 2023 draftees in yards per route run. It's too early to be concerned, but he wasn't able to immediately command a large share of Seattle's passing game. If we're still at this level a year from now, it will be a problem. He says, I wonder if Seattle will live in 3 wide receiver sets in 2024. It was already there more than 63% of the time a year ago. So that's just a quick aside on the Seahawks. Getting back to it, the Lions, number 7 on the skill position list. This team is stacked. David Montgomery was a great player for them. Jahmyr Gibbs obviously was a breakout player. Sam Laporta as a rookie was a great player and has every reason to think he'll be better. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, who really still hasn't emerged. So we know all about the Detroit skill position players. Kind of surprised they're down here at 7. We'll see who he's got above them, but I think that's a very, very solid group. He has the Bears as 6. So keep in mind when I talk to you about offenses from last year, this Bears offense ranked 22nd overall, 25th in passing offense from a DVOA ranking. Bill Barnwell's got them as the 6th best skill position group. And they were 2 years ago ranked 31st. So 31st to 17th last year to 6th this year. That is a steep climb for this crew. And he says, I'm not sure if Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze form the best trio of receivers a quarterback has had during a rookie season, but it cannot be far off. He talks about Matt Leinart having Larry Fitzgerald, Anquan Bolden, and Bryant Johnson in 2006. But in any event, he talks about Rome Odunze would be the most exciting wideout on a quarter of the league's teams before ever playing a snap. And he's probably the number 3 out of the gates. He does mention that there's reason to think expectations might be too high. Odunze is unproven. Allen is 32. And he was still at his peak efficiency last year. He did miss 11 games with injuries. And he basically says if two of the three receivers live up to their hopes, then they're doing fine. But if one of them does and two of them don't, then this crew's not going to necessarily earn this number 6 spot. Cole Kmet was good as a tight end. He does mention he's a little concerned about running back for good reason. DeAndre Swift had a big year. And Roschon Johnson did not have a great rookie season from minus 61 yards over expectation as a rookie. And so interesting to see the Bears ranked so high at 6. Minnesota Vikings at 5. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones, TJ Hawkinson. That one's going to be an awesome one to watch because if you think about the Seahawks defense and how they'd match up, I mean, Justin Jefferson is the number one of number ones. And that's going to be an opportunity for Riq Woolen to live up to the task and the expectations that Leslie Frazier kind of put out there about him being able to travel with a number one player and be able to kind of take him off. I don't see Riq Woolen just shutting Justin Jefferson down. I don't see it. Jordan Addison is number 2. If he's going up against Trey Brown primarily, it depends on where Addison is going to be used on the field. This is where some of the questions about Witherspoon being a nickel, like a slot corner versus on the outside. I mean, I would love to see Spoon and Woolen go up against Jefferson and Addison, but it might be Spoon going up against someone in the slot and Addison being on the outside against Trey Brown. But it's going to be a fascinating one. That's a very powerful, that is a skill position laden offense, especially at the in the passing game, that I think is going to really challenge the Seahawks coverage as much or more than most teams that they're going to face. So I think this 5th ranking is a good one. And if, for example, if you dropped in, you pick your favorite quarterback to that roster, I think people will be talking about the Vikings much differently than they're talking about them right now. He has got, so that's number 5. He's got the Dolphins as number 3. I don't think I have to go into that. And he's got the 49ers as number 1. So that means the Seahawks play 7 of the top 10 skill position groups in 2024. Atlanta, LA, Detroit, Chicago, Minnesota, Miami, and San Francisco. And 2 of those teams, again, are in the division. So double the games. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games. Over half of the Seahawks games will be against offenses that feature, according to Bill Barnwell, top skill position groups in the NFL. Skill positions don't make everything, though. And a couple other ways to look at this. I'm just going to do probably one more to keep this from going forever. Let's look at offensive line. And we'll just look at 2 different rankings. We'll first look at the PFF offensive line rankings. And the Seahawks will face the number 1 offensive line in Detroit. They will face the number 5 offensive line in the New York Jets, the number 6 offensive line in the Atlanta Falcons, the 8th offensive line in the Buffalo Bills. So, and then I'll throw in there the 11th ranked offensive line in the Chicago Bears. So that is 5 of the top ranked offensive lines that the Seahawks will go up against. This one's kind of interesting because I'm going to come back to why I think it's interesting in a second. Let me switch over and give you a different offensive line rankings just to see and compare. Mike Clay of ESPN also does offensive line rankings. He's got the Lions as well as number 1, the Falcons as number 3, the Jets as number 5. He's got the Broncos at number 8, the Packers at 10, and the Bears at 11. So they see that a little differently. He's got the Broncos and Packers in there. PFF did not have those guys in there, but did have Buffalo. I think Buffalo definitely belongs in the top 10 offensive line wise. And so according to Mike Clay, the Seahawks will face 6 of the top 11 offensive lines. PFF has 5 of the top 11. But the implication there, the reason I find this interesting is that means that the Seahawks are not going to be facing, for the most part, I mean, none of those teams are divisional opponents. So that means 12 of the Seahawks' 17 games will not be against elite offensive lines. They've got, like, the PFF has got Minnesota at 13 and the Packers at 14. They've got the Broncos at 15. It's not necessarily that the Seahawks are going to be facing awful offensive lines, but, like, think about the Dolphins. They got the Dolphins at 18th. Mike Clay has the Dolphins. Where does he have the Dolphins? He has the Dolphins at 26th. You know, I think when you're imagining Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams and this wrecking crew of a defensive line, where are they going to make the most hay? It's going to be against some of these mediocre to struggling offensive lines that they can beat off the snap, that they can affect the quarterback. And so I think when I kind of look at all of these rankings, like offensive line, the skill position, past performance from DVOA, Atlanta is a team that has, both by Mike Clay and PFF, one of the top 10 offensive lines. They have one of the top 10 skill groups from Bill Barnwell. And while they were a 24th ranked offense last year, I think there's every reason to think that you insert a quarterback into that and it's going to be a very good crew. So I think Atlanta, especially on the road, is going to pose one of the biggest challenges for the Seahawks defense, and one of the biggest tests for the Seahawks defense next year. Detroit, I think that's another group, top offensive line, top group of skill position players, and a top performer last year. They're bringing guys back. They are getting better. The Seahawks have familiarity with them for sure, but even though the Seahawks have beat them 2 years in a row in Detroit, it has not been because the defense has shut down that offense. Let's be clear. It's because Geno Smith has balled out of his mind and the offense has put up a lot of points. If you look as well, I mean, San Francisco is an obvious one. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time there. They're a challenge for every defense. Miami is like a really interesting one. I'm curious what you guys think about the Dolphins matchup, because there is no doubt from a skill position perspective, they throw some serious weapons out in the field. They have a great play caller in Mike McDaniel. I think their quarterback is okay, not great. And actually, I'm curious. curious where where the where PFF ranks Tua from a quarterback ranking. 1 second. PFF QB rankings. They have got Tua Tagovailoa as the 14th ranked quarterback. Yeah, so all that makes sense, but I think that offensive line could be their downfall, especially coming all the way to Seattle. I have a little bit more confidence in this Seahawks defense when they're going to be facing a suspect offensive line. McDaniel does have Tua get the ball off pretty quickly, but this is a guy with a 3.5% turnover worthy play rate. And you think about Mike McDonald's defense and how he can be confusing. We've also seen Mike McDaniel challenge Mike McDonald's defense in the past. But if you look back at last year, let me double check and make sure I'm not spewing baloney. The Ravens held the Dolphins to 19 points and 375 yards. So Mike McDonald, I think there's some rumors out there because of Mike McDaniel like owned him in their first matchup that he's a kryptonite for Mike McDonald. Not last year. So I don't know that I see that as the case. I think the Miami one's a really interesting one. Not quite sure how I feel about it. Curious where they have Kirk Cousins on this list. Where they rank Kirk Cousins. I would bet he's in the where do they have Kirk Cousins? Fascinating. 15. And I got Cousins right around where they've got Tua. All right. So we talked about Atlanta, talked about Detroit. San Francisco's obvious. What do we think about the Jets, guys and gals? Do we think the Jets are going to be one of the toughest tests for the Seahawks Seahawks defense in 2024? It so much hinges on how Aaron Rodgers is playing and whether he's even still playing. The Seahawks do not face the Jets until week 13. I think the odds are 50-50 that Aaron Rodgers is still playing by then. And we'll definitely know what we're getting. But if he's what he's been before, then yes, that is going to be because the Jets have a decent offensive line, because they have a elite running back and an elite receiver and a quarterback who is able to diagnose things pre-snap as well as anybody. I would say that they're likely to be one of the toughest tests because I would actually can't wait to see Aaron Rodgers up against Mike McDonald's defense because it is a cat and mouse game of disguise versus diagnosis. And Aaron Rodgers is all about getting the ball out quickly and seeing things based off pre-snap reads better than almost any quarterback. Mike McDonald really tries to make that hard. So it'll be really fun to see that back and forth. But I think that stands out as one. And then the other one I'll call out, that Bears game. I think that's the other one that stands out for me. Obviously, you could say the Rams. Rams have been a tough test for Mike McDonald. He has not solved Sean McVay. And that's a good crew. But the Bears one for me stands out a little bit because Caleb Williams and his ability to create on the move, even if he's under pressure. We'll see, obviously, once we get into it. But I think he's one of the only movement quarterbacks on the Seahawks schedule next year. I mean, depending if Bo Nix is playing, sure. But most of the rest of these guys, I mean, Josh Allen is a movement guy. Kyler Murray. But pretty much everybody else is mostly a stationary quarterback for the most part. And so I think Caleb Williams shifting around, escaping pressure, making throws off platform, off script, that's going to be a bit of a unique challenge for the Seahawks defense next year. So yeah, I think I'll close there because you can kind of look at this a bunch of different ways, and we certainly will. We'll be breaking this down more and more. But I'm really fascinated to see, right now, if I were to guess, the Seahawks are going to be a better pass defense than a run defense. But it's really hard to tell, and there's so much unknown. I think that teams that have weaker offensive lines are going to be teams that the Seahawks potentially can really overpower given their defensive line. And that's not something we've been able to say in past years. You can say, that's always the case. Seahawks have played terrible offensive lines in the past, and they have not been able to exploit them. They just haven't been. So I think this year that's going to be a bigger bellwether about whether the Seahawks are going to have a really tough test on defense than it has been in at least the last few years. All right, everybody, give the show a like, please. Helps a few people find the show. It also is just a nice way to say thank you for the content, and I appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel. We're growing and growing. We're getting closer to, we're 7 days away from rookies reporting. We are 14 days away from me having training camp, live reactions for you. So grow. You're going to want to be subscribed to the channel to get all that. You also are going to want to get access to, as a YouTube member, I will probably start doing more member-only content as training camp starts. I will start doing Patreon-only content right now. If you're patreon.com/hawkblogger, it's the only way to get the audio ad-free versions of this pod. I'd recommend you do that. And if you join now, you still have time. You get immediate access to the Slack channel where you can ask us questions for real Hawk Talk. Tonight at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I will be here to walk you through it with some of my buddies. So until then, I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.